In this video, we're looking at exponential functions. So an exponential function takes the form of y equals a to the power of x, where a is greater than 0. So usually, for most exponentials, like the basics, your domain is from negative infinity to infinity. That means it can go on the x-axis all the way in the left direction and all the way to the right. But then the range is from 0 to negative infinity, and it never reaches 0. To infinity. It never reaches 0 though. So it's from 0 all the way up. Now, the y-intercept is always going to be 1, because if you change the x to 0, which is how you find the y-intercept, a to the power of 0 will always equal 1. Later on, you'll see exceptions to this, but I'll go through them in a bit. So the graph is always above the x-axis, and there's no x-intercept. It doesn't actually ever cross the x-axis. Now, the x-axis in most cases, the general case, is the asymptote. So when I say general case, I'm talking, for example, what's on the bottom of your screen there, y equals 2 to the power of x. As you can see, it's crossing the y-axis at 1, and its asymptote is at y equals 0, x there, the x-axis. All right, so this is what I would say takes the form of what we call more of an original exponential. Now, if we look at another example here, we have y equals 2 to the power of x plus 2. Now, you'll notice on the sketch that now the asymptote is actually up at 2, and 3 is where it's crossing the y-axis. Now, this is because this here is what we call a vertical translation. So when we're going to graph or sketch these ones, it's always good to start with the original and then start to add little parts on that you know what they do. So if you have a 2 out on the back side, that moves the whole graph up 2 spots. So the whole graph is moved up 2 spots. Now, if it was negative 2, it would move down 2 spots. So we're going to add something else on now. We're going to say, well, what happens if I have a 3 out the front? It's a little bit separate. It's 3, then bracket 2 to the power of x. So what that means is that 3 is multiplying by every original y value in the graph. So if we look it up at that top one, our y-intercept was 1. So now our y-intercept's 3. So if we had a point that crosses when y is 2, that now crosses when y is 6. So essentially, it's just increasing much more quickly. All right, so original y values are multiplied by 3 in this case. So how to imagine is if you grab the bottom of the exponential and the top, and you're just pulling it vertically up and down. So you're stretching it upwards away from each other. You're making all the y values essentially larger. So here we have another example. Now what happens when it's y equals 2 to the power of x plus 1? This time the plus 1 is up here with the x. So this is what we call a horizontal translation. And because it's plus 1, we're actually shifting to the left 1 spot. If it was minus 1, we'd be shifting to the right. It's a little bit opposite of what you would think. So when you think of plus 1, you usually go to the right. In this case, when it's plus 1, you actually go to the left. All right? So the whole graph is as if you picked it up and moved it 1 spot to the left. So those are quick ways on how to graph multiple different types of exponentials. Start with your basic one, and then start adding on things, horizontal translations or vertical translations. So when you're asked to sketch these exponentials, remember, you can always go back down to the foundational skills of using a table of values. And I do recommend that. If you cannot see how to sketch an original exponential or any exponential, create a table of values that has a wide range from -5 up to 5. You can go -5, -3, 0, whatever you pick. You control the x values, you find the y values, plot them on a coordinate grid, and then you can sketch your exponential through there. some things to remember if you're trying to, you're starting with an original and you're modifying it. Remember, if you have y equals negative fx, so you're adding on a negative, whatever the original was, it's now reflected on the x-axis. It's flipped up and down. If it's negative on the inside, so all your x's are now negatives, you're flipping horizontally, you're flipping around the y-axis, and if you have both, reflect on both the x and the y. Now remember, if you do have a reflection on both, it's just simpler, in my opinion, to sketch the original, then sketch one of either the reflection on the x or the y first, do one of them, and then do the reflection on the other one, whatever one you didn't do. So let's say, for example, I do my original, I then do the reflection on the x-axis, and then I go and reflect that one on the y-axis. Don't try to do it all at once. Sometimes that can be too overwhelming.